Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Happy holiday weekend for those of you that are starting your holidays early. I appreciate your time here on a Friday afternoon. I'm very excited about this panel. After hearing the morning speakers, hearing patient stories, really understanding what some of the challenges are and what the impact is on care that's really happening and how we can make a difference in patient experience. I'm really excited to hear from our speakers today on the panel. So I'd like to introduce the speakers one by one, and then they're going to give a quick introduction about themselves. First, we have Joe Cutrell from AT&T. He's the Director for Strategy and Innovation for the Healthcare and Life Sciences Department. Monica Olaf is with TVR Communications. She's the Patient Experience Outcomes Director. We have John Reeves from Dell Boomi. He's the Healthcare Solutions Evangelist. And we have Kevin Stuck. He's the Director with Salesforce for their Healthcare and Life Sciences Division. And we have a late entry to the panel from Google. We have Chris Vaughn, a technical solutions consultant. So I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves, a little bit about their role and background in healthcare, and what their companies are doing specifically focused on patient experience. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. So I'm Joe Cutrell. I'm with AT&T. I'm based in Memphis, Tennessee, and I'm dedicated to our healthcare group and our healthcare vertical at AT&T. I'm Director of Strategy and Innovation, and prior to moving to AT&T about 5 years ago, I also had some groups that did network architecture and network design for a large corporation as well. So my background really comes from the network point of view and connecting things, whether it's internet, voice, video, wireless, IoT, mobility, those kinds of things. I've been working specifically within the healthcare vertical at AT&T since the beginning of this year, and much like Alan said, there's sort of it's maybe seen as a fairly risk-averse industry, and rightfully so. And so we've moved a few resources in to bring different perspectives to our healthcare vertical within AT&T.
Thanks, Joe. Monica Olaf with TVR Communications. TVR, for those who don't know us, is a leader in interactive systems at the patient's bedside as driven through their television. Most recently, my background is on the hospital side, so I was very refreshed and energized to hear the panel this morning because I recently came from the healthcare side the last 15 years as Director of Patient Experience in 2 major health systems in New Jersey. I come to TVR with a background in patient experience. TVR is looking to expand their role as it comes to the patient experience and tying technology together. So when talking to the health systems and out there with our clients, it's been very helpful to them to have someone who understands the day-to-day challenges, whether it be HCAHPS scores or all the things that they're trying to drive from their end. What does it mean to them, and how can our product and what we're trying to deliver assist them with what they're trying to do every day? So I'm glad to be here. Thanks.
Yep, there you go. Oh, sorry. My name is John Reeves. I'm with Dell Boomi. Dell Boomi is in the integration platform as a service space. If you're not aware of us, we're with the Dell Technologies family. We're a leader in this space in Gartner Magic Quadrant. And for myself, I'm the evangelist, and I run the strategy for our focus in healthcare today and life sciences across all the segments. My background, I come from the provider and payer space, so I've worked both sides of the fence. And I've focused on technical transformation and have been global in scope with my healthcare responsibilities over my professional career. So it's an interesting perspective in the product management with interoperability and standards. So I think the efforts that Boomi provides most poignant to the patient experience is able to use our platform in a very agile way to create these platforms of engagement that we've heard so much about today that are lacking. We heard a lot of a lack of emotional quotient. We hear a lot about how smart we are. There's a lot of talk about IQ, but we fail on the EQ. And so I think where we work with great partners like Salesforce, and we'll see further on in the discussion, we are now having to reimagine our continuum of care. And we're needing to put the patients first. And to do that, we have to be agile and cost conscious because now we're out of money. as well. So, being able to think strategically and diagonally across data to bring these experiences together in rapid form is really the focus going forward. So thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kevin Stuck. First of all, I'm thrilled. I live in Cardiff by the Sea. I handle a global strategy role with our organization. In the last 12 weeks, I've been to Australia and Chicago, Boston, New York. I'm thrilled to be able to drive 10 miles to a meeting. I'm thrilled to be here. Longtime healthcare professional, actually a degree in healthcare administration back in the 80s. Was a drug rep out of school, got bored with that, and ran a 150-bed skilled nursing facility for about 4 years. Then outsourced rehab services to hospitals and to nursing homes, and then went on to a startup physician practice management company here in La Jolla that was doing inpatient and intensivist. Left that after some funding and ended up in tech, where I was strategic account manager for out of healthcare. So I managed accounts like Boeing and Toyota and Disney, performance management, analytics. Did that for a number of years, and then moved into the actual delivery with a regional SI, and then ended up becoming a managing director at KPMG, where I worked with a lot of multinationals. Always healthcare, always as a constant. Last few years, I lead our strategic partnerships models with Salesforce on a global basis with some of our largest implementation partners, but really working with Salesforce, which is a significant player in healthcare, and I think it's an interesting piece people don't know about us. 18 years in healthcare, over 8,000 customers. What we're doing in patient experience across providers, payers, life science, med devices is really the consumerization. People's lives are saying, I do everything in my life in a consumer model. Why can't I do it in healthcare? So we're doing it in regards to touches. We're doing it in regards to omni-channel. We're doing it in regards to really empowering caregivers, families, inside and outside of the walls across the care continuum. Really exciting time for us, and we've developed specific products. It's interesting because people look at it. I mean, we could not have a worse name for healthcare, but underlying it, you'll see some of the most extensible and proven technologies in regards to connecting people and teams, and we're really growing quickly and super dedicated to healthcare.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Vaughn. I'm a solution architect with Google's Healthcare and Life Sciences team. My background is primarily in technology. I actually came and started my career in healthcare working for a company called Apogee, which is an API management company. We developed some new capabilities to allow for integration of EHRs, and more specifically have been involved in working with some of the evolving standards like FHIR to help bring technology and data to patients through mobile apps and so on and so forth. More recently, I joined the Google Healthcare and Life Sciences group, which is a little bit more back-end focused and tends to be a little bit more involved in providing provider-facing solutions that allow providers to get a time to diagnosis a little bit more quickly so that they can spend more time working closely with the patients and really kind of helping to address some of the specific concerns that we had talked about previously. Google obviously has a pretty significant footprint in healthcare. We have Google Fit, of course, as a mobile application. We also have what I think somebody once called the Google Medical University, which is the search capability that allows people to find just about anything that you'd like to know about healthcare and technology. But in the Healthcare and Life Sciences group, we also have quite a few capabilities that help people like yourselves to integrate their EHRs, to be able to expose data securely and in a high-performance fashion and scalable fashion through mobile applications and applications that are hosted out in the cloud. We've also got quite a presence in radiology and imaging through some of our DICOM image processing. We've got quite a bit of work going on in genomics on the research front, and we're starting to get more and more involved with consumers through initiatives such as 23andMe and some of the other things that I'm sure you've heard about, where patients can expose their genomic data to researchers and then actually have an opportunity to do citizen science, if you will, against some of that same information. Thank you.
Thank you to all our panelists. It's a great segue into kind of my observations that when I started practicing medicine or being in the healthcare industry, none of these companies were kind of synonymous with kind of providing care or being involved in the space. I was used to talking to electronic health record companies or med device companies, logistics companies. They're all focused in healthcare. And then now we see in the last 10 years kind of the rapid rise of companies that have made their success outside of the industry and are now starting to apply the lessons they've learned, technology they've developed, software platforms to help patients and help physicians in this space. So my first question for the panel is really around, based on you and your company's experience outside of healthcare, what lessons have you learned that can really help you, create the new norm or, break down some of the barriers that are there for patients to really have a truly kind of, great experience when they go to see their healthcare practitioner. So I don't know if anyone wants to take that first, or we can start with Joe.
So yeah, I think it was brought up just a little bit earlier as well. One of the directions that we see taking us there is consumerization. So sometimes we get thought of as the company that makes cell phones, or the ones that put the wires in the ground, or more recently in the news for other video content reasons. But in fact, we also build complete solutions, or we have lots of other things, from security to the different things that enable those. And one of the big things that's been causing us to focus in that area from a patient point of view is the consumerization, where we've all gotten used to using our cell phone for doing everything basically in our lives. And so we're taking advantage of that high power computer with a nice display on it to do lots of other things, where we can connect up either things that may be implants, or they may be something behind the scenes that doesn't directly affect the patient. But one of the things I learned in my previous life is the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. And so all of this eventually leads toward proper patient care, or improved patient care. So specifically when our patients are used to using their cell phones for everything, their smartphones, we've seen those as a great way to relay data and to give data immediately back to the patient on how things are going, whether it's directly connected to their wearables or implants or other aspects of their health care.
Go ahead, Kevin.
So one of the things, in working with a lot of organizations at a national conference recently, one of the topics was about how risk inhibits innovation. So we have organizations, and we think about this new move where we're enabling the consumer, the patients looking for all this information, looking at cross-functional, and immediately the organization says, what about HIPAA? What about PHI? What about that patient information? You can't do that. You can't do that. So a lot of innovations happening in organizations, and then by the time they get to the execution of the project level, in comes legal and risk, and they start lining things out. What we talk about is a changing culture, and we see some big pharma and some of the leading healthcare organizations, is to bring risk into the process early. Have them be an active part. We saw business users and IT coming together in regards to changing. When you go to legal, you're explaining the business process where you're at. The same is true to get them to understand that the innovation is not, let them understand how it works. And we're seeing that as a big change that's fundamental to, again, allowing that innovation to happen.
So,
Actually, I want to echo what the other panelists have talked about, and actually share with you a story about a colleague of mine at Google. She's in her, I guess, early 30s now. She's extremely active. She's a mountain biker, and that seems to be a theme around here. She's also an avid runner and so on. But not too long ago, she was diagnosed with some heart disease, and she's now 100% dependent on a pacemaker. And at the time she had this surgery and had the implant done, she had a lot of thoughts running through her head around, well, is this pacemaker going to work? How do I know it's working? Am I going to be able to resume my normal life? What's going to happen from here? And there was a lot of real fear and doubt in her mind about, what was going to happen to her now that she was kind of in this new style of life. So being a technologist, she actually turned to mobile applications and data that was provided through the implant, and also exercise and health and fitness apps to kind of help her get a grip on this fear and really kind of reinforce the fact that the pacemaker is in fact working. It is controlling her heart rate, even though she's doing rather strenuous exercise. And she's also got data that she can take back to her primary care team to help them see, okay, the pacemaker was working as expected. This is the level of activity I had. This is what happened to my body while I was doing it. And it really gave her that level of confidence that the technology was working and really improved her quality of life, because now she didn't have to deal with this fear about whether she was going to be able to continue a life that she had lived previously.
So one of the things I want to follow on was the things that we've learned from other industries, which is now making self-evident, is the 360-degree view of the customer. Now, that's a ubiquitous term now that applies to all industries, and in healthcare in particular, we call it view of the patient. In particular, to Kevin's point about risk. Of course, risk is important to manage, but it's no longer the case that's expected for a health organization to have all of the data. It's just too much data. Thank you, AT&T, for making them, and Google for giving free access to data lines and whatnot. But the bottom line is there's too much information, and we don't want to, for liability and whatnot, have them on premise or be responsible in that regard. But one of the things that's apparent in the 360-degree view of the experience, the patient experience, is that we can create these situations now, these experiences of care, to close the gap, to address the blind spots in the traditional legacy workflows and the systems that provide those services to the customers and the caregivers. And a company like ours, for instance, yes, we could extrapolate it across industry, so we're able to decorate the experience that you need to have in place without introducing more risk. So we can, in event, de-risk by just cherry-picking attributes or those things needed for the customer or the patient experience to provide those higher levels of care that we heard the patient saying is lacking, right? We need to now drive the focus of the patient, as you know, and that's something that's very heartening to see happening now, right? We can do that because of all these technologies, social, consumer-driven, now making its way in proper spotlight.
Right. Thank you. And that takes us to the next question, is that when we have all these kind of interventions of new technology coming from outside the industry, what is it that we can do to prevent or minimize what we've heard before, interruption of clinical workflows, impacting the patient experience in a negative way, and how to deal with all of this data? I want to start with Monica, to maybe share some experience from your background, how you've seen this come in, technology disrupt these things in a negative way, and what are some solutions that you think we can start to think about?
I would definitely say there is somewhat of a negative impact in its most simplest form. Empathizing with the patients and their families is key. We heard it this morning. You'll hear people beat the same drum because that gets back to the basics of healthcare. That's why people are there, their family, tying into that whole experience and what they're going through at the end. Throwing technology or applications at them can be confusing, overwhelming at times. How do we streamline that and weed through that? As technology folks, that's our job, to make it easier for the healthcare organization to be able to maybe connect the dots or tie or string things together so that they can extrapolate the data, the information from the listening posts that they're gathering it from. But on a daily basis, interacting with patients from an advocacy role, you can really see the frustration on the patient's face, whether it's from a confusing conversation that the provider had with them, or discharge instructions that they may or may not understand, and how do we make that easier for them to digest, so that when they leave, they have the best clinical outcome, which is our ultimate goal all around.
Great. And I'd like to hear from some of the other panels what your specific companies or solutions are doing to kind of address this problem. How are you working with the stakeholders involved, either the patients or the providers in some cases, to overcome the disruption that technology can bring?
So a case in point is NYU. They had 7 hospitals and 30 ambulatory centers and 300 call center agents in Florida. Disparate systems dealing with the patients across that disparate, that environment. One of the things that they did is standardize on our platform, which at the core was around call center metrics, candidly. That's what paid for it. They eliminated 1 million minutes, $1.5 million savings. They went to an omni-channel personalization. The tagline was, not every patient wants to interact on the phone. So we want to go digital. But the underlying theme, once they've done that now, is the next generation is the personalization and proactive interface with those customers or those patients. A key point, though, in dealing with aging parents myself, they do like to talk on the phone, and they want a personal connection with that individual. At the same time, myself and others, I don't want to talk to anybody on the phone. I want to go in and digitally figure out what my appointments are, what I need, what's involved, and find cost-effective ways for medication and things like that. I want a self-service. We need systems that provide both of those avenues, but it really does come down to getting that information as a personalized, information for that person who's interacting with them. A key point we talk about is really point of service. At the point of service, having them be intelligent, being guided, and understand, if they call in and you say, well, I've noticed, Mrs. Smith, as you're trying to make an appointment, you've missed your last 3 appointments and you haven't fulfilled your pharmacy. What's going on? Can we talk to you about that? So being proactive, we're talking about AI and process, not moonshot, big-time medication technology, AI, but really an augmented intelligence to caregivers, care coordinators to be able to, personally engage. The final thing I'll say is we've seen a shift in health plans where they no longer want to be called payers, they want to be healthcare organizations. They want to proactively outreach, engage with a customer, automate their interaction with them about disease states. But underlying it, they want that personal connection to understand that complete patient and not have it be disparate. We call it swivel chair integration, right? They've got this for this one, this for that. Have it all in one place. And that's a big push that we see across both pharma and in patient services and healthcare and providers and payers.
When you're saving millions of dollars, that means your company at large is worth a certain amount. There's a lot of smaller things out there, right? Yeah. And healthcare is made up of what was it, a cottage industry, I heard? So there's many cottages to be refurnished and to re-examine. So that brings us to the Winchester House. And many of us either live, work, or know of a Winchester House. The story is poignant because the technologies that we represent here today carry with them the components to actually make those houses livable. And it doesn't require demolishing, it doesn't require re-architecting. In many cases, it's just a matter of rethinking and re-examining where your priorities are. And I think that's one of the benefits going forward as you think about the customer successes that we all have and that are available and the wins and whatnot. Let's not forget that we're all in this together and there are, we can incrementally add along the way to transform our exact situations that we're in with these technologies today at a good cost, at a very cost-effective way that is within our reach because of the somewhat commoditized view and action that's happened in this marketplace. It does not mean, that you get less quality in what along the way. These are all now, wonderful things are at our disposal.
I'd like to add maybe one of the things that we've added to answer your question, Alan, from an IT point of view, is that at the same time that all of this data has been growing and getting much larger, it sort of parallels something that we've seen where from a network security point of view, we suddenly have so much information about what's going on the network, whether it's internet or voice networks or whatever, that we can no longer make sense out of it, so we have to have some intelligent algorithms take that million observation set and bring it down, filter it somewhat, and then eventually filter it down to things that can be used by some humans that then need to go out and do some work. And so one of the things that we've also done as a part of our open source projects is we've put some AI libraries out with the Linux Foundation, also working with Tech Mahindra on being able to make those to where anybody can drop them into their code as well. And so when you end up with this vast amount of information, now you can send it to some processing engine, whether it's video or image processing or whether it's some other anomaly processing that you want to be able to get at. And so we can take that vast amount of information and now hopefully try to get those anomalies out to improve the patient care from all the data that we see.
Chris?
Yeah, I just wanted to tie back to something that the speaker from Intermountain had talked about before. He had a slide that spoke about the building blocks, and I think there was a question in the audience about how you actually make those happen and what kind of people have been successful in that. I come from a background in digital innovation, and I've worked with quite a few companies in organizations or in industries very similar to healthcare, specifically telecommunications and financial. And what some of these companies have discovered is that if they're able to implement something in the way of an API strategy that allows them to kind of segregate and wall off certain aspects that are highly complex within their organizations, then they're able to treat these as black boxes for the purpose of integration. And what that allows them to do then is to take the functions within these black boxes and change them over time without necessarily changing the integrations between various pieces of the clinical workflow. So that actually allows you to streamline processes, introduce new technologies, and evolve the workflow over time without necessarily having to do broad-scale rip and replace or extremely disruptive changes to your internal processes. So Google, for example, has Apogee, which was an acquisition about 1.5 years ago, that does API management and enables this capability to build standardized contracts between various parts of your IT systems. And we also have healthcare APIs in various systems and machine learning and so on that allow you to control access to data, to expose it securely, and to manage the flow of data and the creation of predictions through machine learning, as one of the other panelists had spoken about previously.
Thank you, guys. So I want to share an encounter story about a patient and a provider and the two different views that they shared. The patient complained that they waited too long to see their oncologist. They're in the waiting room. They have a pretty significant diagnosis. So they filed a complaint with their hospital or health system, said, hey, you know, the wait times aren't acceptable. That obviously will impact CG-CAP scores and other patient experience metrics. So the health system goes and speaks to the provider. And the provider says, you know, because of the type of work I do, I have to spend a lot of time reviewing the medical record. I have to look up the consults, review the MRI and CT scans, pull up pathology slides. All this stuff that's in the electronic health record is now my responsibility, so I can go and give the patient the best experience possible. So the question was, what did you do before you had the EMR? And the physician answered, I never looked at this information. I went in and had that interaction with the patient, but not knowing necessarily all the information that was available to me from peers within the industry, reports that were sent electronically. Sometimes you couldn't read your other doctor's notes, so as a physician, you didn't get any value out of that. So that showed the kind of the collision between technology trying to empower providers and give patients a better experience, but causing, you know, changes to the workflow and impacting both the experience from the patient in a negative way, and also to the provider who feels an obligation now to have that he or she has access to tools and has to use them. So, you know, I want to turn to the panel and ask, you know, what are some of those barriers that you guys are facing to really get some of the more practical applications or solutions to really scale across systems? Because I could see resistance from both the providers, executives who aren't familiar with the technology, or even patients who say, hey, you know, we don't need technology in our healthcare. We can do it with all of our other industries, but we want to kind of have that one-on-one experience. So I don't know if you guys have stories or you know, something to share around how you've been able to overcome this, or at least address it in the near term.
I think almost just a little bit on your point. Worked a lot with nurses in IT when you're transforming technical transformation efforts, and you're working closely with clinical transformation initiatives. You team up with nurses, and I've often told you know, how clairvoyant they are. And I've seen that myself. Many times clinicians just omit. It's just not part of the workflow and things, and they've grown accustomed to having certain things there at the ready. And many times those are nurses with everything memorized, and they know the workflow. So when we embark on technical transformation efforts to you know, run alongside clinical initiatives, it's very important that we understand from a very human perspective what are the demands on the people doing the job. And I think it's very important that you take great care in that to the gentleman earlier speaking that it is not a technology in and of itself that is going to be the cure-all, that it does involve an extreme focus on the person. And we heard that with the patient experience panel today. And I think We need to keep weaving that into our workflows, into our modules. As we create an API modular library, we make things easier to click and connect. We have to keep that in mind, that the true architects of those modules and the true emphasis is on the end result, which is better quality outcomes, a better experience, lower cost, you know, and to that end. That just seems to be an endeavor that needs to be spinning in our product engineering minds, you know, as we go forward to make it more palatable.
Kevin?
So, you know, one of the challenges we face with technology is the proverbial why, and more importantly, why now? We look at patient experience and you ask, you know, well, it's kind of a big bang, you know, how does that really deal with my process reengineering? How does that change the way we do business? What, you know, it's mind-boggling how big it can get. So one of the aspects is, you know, how do you start and how do you put together pilots or you put together a program that shows value? You know, when we look at kind of the foundations of what we do, we're about acquisition, onboarding, serve, and retain or loyalty programs. And so the essence of it was I target a population, I target a high-cost population, I target a high-revenue population, and I put in a focused effort to acquire them. And I do that in a digital experience, whether it's web or whether it's referrals or whatever my system is to drive that. Then I automate my onboarding. I put in the systems that allow automation for processes of approvals, H&Ps, those types of things. We talk about bariatric hospitals that go through 20 hours of digital onboarding that's automated with 80-90% adherence versus the personal aspect of, you know, dealing with those types of patients that have to go through a care counselor. It's very personal. They get patients qualified through the process. Then you deal with a carve out on certain individuals for care coordination, identifying which of those need to be managed in regards to high frequency of readmission or risk areas, and then how do I return? So I look at someone like a Cancer Treatment Center of America. They reach out aggressively into the market with people querying about cancer. They have a very strong referral to appointments. They put them through a terrific program and they retain them for life. And so we see organizations, another one is a small company called Health 180 Health Partners that's dealing with obituate women who are pregnant. And their previous program, 13% adherence on phone only. They went to a digital model, 80-90%. Millions of dollars saved, reductions in neonatal. So these are carve-outs. These are target populations that can demonstrate to your organization the power of patient experience versus trying to big bang the whole organization.
Joe, did you have a comment?
Yeah, and one of the other things that we've seen is that there has to be buy-in across the board. There has to be executive buy-in for any of these things to actually make sense. And one of the ways that we've seen a technique to help with that is that knowing that with innovation, solving business problems or solving patient problems or customer problems is just much more satisfying than technical problems or re-platforming. So in the past when we worked in IT, all of our problems were math. Here's how many concurrent connections I have, or here's how much data I need to be able to use. But now we've got a technique that's worked very well for years called an immersion event, and I know other partners do this as well. And so knowing that good ideas can come from smart people, or two heads are better than one, so you start to work with a larger group, and when the business and IT works together, you start to get better buy-in on how to solve business problems, and then extending that into a third dimension, working with your partners, your suppliers, to do things like immersion events where you bring some subject matter experts on site and actually watch certain business processes happen, and then come back and try to digest that and get buy-in from the business side and the IT side.
And Joe, you made a great point about getting executive stakeholder buy-in. I find that hospital leadership, health system directors, managers, front-level staff, they are consumed with taking care of the patient and doing the day-to-day activities. Where can folks like that have an interest in learning about what other solutions there are, what other technology applications can take place, what's a good way for folks in those different positions to learn more about, you know, what's coming in technology or offered across all these different vendors? I don't know, Monica, maybe you can share how you've kept up to date with all the technology processes and how it's impacting your patient experience role.
Really just networking, I guess, with other groups. I've been in the technology sector for 6 months, so I'm pretty much jumping in head first, and small groups like this organizations that are nonprofits that are out there spreading the word about the good that technology is doing versus how complicated and weaving and how frustrating it might be. But that leadership buy-in is so crucial from, I guess an ROI perspective, but that's not the only thing. At the end of the day, it really is about how it's improving that income, improving that patient experience. Put the numbers aside, whether it's your health grades report card, it's your HCAHPS data, indirectly, yes, technology will impact all of that. Can we at any given time say that we're going to be the sole reason that their 9 and 10 rating goes up? No, not exactly. But there's an indirect correlation, and I think chipping away at it in small pieces with a small win rather than a big, large hit is where technology is making its impact.
Do anyone else have comments, anything to add?
I think you bring up a good point about a local aspect. We're recognizing, especially in the provider marketplace, that there's some early adopters that are pioneering this piece, and we get frequently asked, where are you doing this? Where are you engaged? So Mount Sinai and other major systems, Banner Health, NYU I mentioned, but we also with a ton of smaller facilities. I invite all of you to come to Dreamforce in San Francisco, and you can join 170,000 people that are across multiple industries, intimate party we have there. But we do, last year we had over 100 breakouts for healthcare. And you'll see like customers, and at the same time, cross-reference. We have executive summits where we have retail, we have other leading industries that we're seeing healthcare executives come from now that are starting to ask, why are you running this as you always have? So especially on the payer side, we're seeing a lot of innovation. But through it all, it's a digital world. Embrace webinars. There's a lot of activity that if you look out into our types of companies, you'd be surprised the depth of what we're doing in healthcare. And by all means, again, the regional HIMSS, is a big important marketplace for us and others. But I think it's a tsunami of innovation that's coming to the provider space, and I think the executive teams are going to have to, explain to a board what are we doing around patient and consumerization at a level like they never have before.
And I'd just like to say that it seems as though there's an inordinate burden on IT and the technology of tomorrow to fix the problems that we're living with today. And I don't want to discount what we can learn from abroad. Working with some folks in the UK, and there's a pharmacy benefits manager, and it baked into the cost of the relationship of the medications to the hospitals is adherence and enforcement and tracking of adherence with the patient. And I thought that was really interesting, that I think although the technology will advance to a point and that we will be able to reevaluate ourselves in the shadow and find our place in putting the center of the patient first, but we're going to have to think legislatively and understand a different burden because it is too costly, right? And so there's a lot to learn outside of technology, and I think that's going to be an interesting wave as well, that tsunami of legislation or reevaluation of sharing the burden. I think that will be interesting in how it impacts.
One other way to bring in some of this is to also look at solutions that are cross-industry, maybe not necessarily healthcare solutions. And we've got a half dozen what we call foundries, our innovation centers, that work on specific solutions to specific problems. And so one of the things we'll do is bring executives into one of those foundry locations to have ideation sessions or to talk about what we've done in other industries. For instance, taking a camera and pointing it at an old analog gauge and sending that up to some image processing AI software in the cloud, and suddenly now we've digitized a machine that we're not allowed to modify just by putting a sensor on it that looks just like a webcam. Things like that are now practical, and in the past they weren't. And so we see maybe some of that experience coming from other industries. Now we can expose. One of our foundries is healthcare specific, but some of them are specific to other technologies as well, and that's been a good tool for us to use.
I heard mentioned a lot of technologies that now in healthcare seem to be making their way. I led a discussion about artificial intelligence just this week, and we've heard about machine learning blockchain, robotic process automation. For each of the panelists, can you share what you think the next big thing is? So kind of take those and swipe them off the table. What do you think is going to really have a tremendous impact on the patient experience, if any? If you think it's technology, and if you don't think technology is the solution, what is it that's kind of the core fundamental attributes of delivering care that we really need to refocus on? Because instead of being distracted by all these shiny new objects, a lot of patients and physicians are trying to adopt different things, and some of it is not costly, and it's not creating the right outcomes or adding value to the system, but it's just the next trend. So I wanted to hear each of yours opinion about what the next big thing is, or if we should take a look back and focus on something more fundamental. Maybe start at the end with Chris and then come back down.
Sure. So despite the fact that we tend to see a lot of people vest machine learning with capabilities and powers that it doesn't necessarily have right now, I really do think machine learning is going to be a pretty significant piece of provider workflows going forward. So for example, Google has initiatives going on right now to help in radiological workflows where they can build machine learning models that can detect certain types of tumors and then have those pictures and predictions and recommendations referred to radiologists so that they can verify with their own expertise that these things are true. And that really does accelerate the time to a diagnosis for patient and gives the patient some additional confidence that not only does the radiologist with his or her level of expertise feel that this is the case, but there's also a significant body of additional work that's informing the machine learning model that lends credence to the radiologist's recommendations as well. I'm sure you've also seen some of the work that we've done with skin cancers. We've got software now that can take natural light images from dermatological studies and actually make recommendations on the possibility of skin cancers and so on. And these are things that are really accelerating the time to diagnosis and giving providers a better opportunity to actually spend more time with patients to help them understand what it is that's going on, to talk in more detail about exactly what's happening in their body and give them some additional confidence in the diagnoses. Machine learning obviously is also being used quite a bit in the genomics area, and when you start looking at the work that's being done in genomics to really understand the roots of disease and in particular what collaboration is taking place now between research scientists in genomics and citizen scientists through initiatives like the Open Humans Project, where people are able to submit their DNA and have that made available to both researchers and to other citizen scientists for analysis. There's some extremely exciting things going on in that area, and I'm really optimistic and hopeful that those will bear fruit, not only for some of the initiatives that we've got going on right now, but for many more things to come.
So from our take and from what I'm seeing in the marketplace, AI is very much at the top, but there's varying levels of AI. I came out of an analytics background that always had a sense of a historical kind of latency to it, right? You would put stuff together, reporting, you'd analyze, you'd model, you'd plan, you'd change your business. What we see now is the ability to embed AI in process. So in the interaction, whether it's clinical or personal aspect, there's almost an augmented suggestion in real time that comes up in that bottoms-up kind of interaction at point of service. That's an exciting piece. So we absolutely, I think everyone's thrilled. If I have any kind of imaging, I want machine learning looking at my scans, and that's fantastic. But I also want my care coordinator to recognize that there's weather or traffic that sends me a note that says you have an appointment coming up, you might want to leave a half an hour earlier. Those types of real human kind of additions is what I think we're going to see. Refer to it as kind of demystifying AI and pulling it into really pragmatic, almost personal assistance, both at the individual level, directly to the organization, like in a bot communication to you, but also in that personal piece. Another area we're seeing is a blending of the bots or an artificial intelligence. If I'm communicating, then I go into a virtual agent to a real agent, and that information comes with you. It follows you, it identifies. Again, back to that personalization that we all want. We want to have them know who we are, have insights to what our experience is, and provide guidance. And so it's an exciting time that we can really change the shape of organizations when we empower at the point of service across the organization guidance, directions, towards a point of view, towards a mission, towards quality, towards types of, so with that, it's dependent on organizations like Google and Dell, Boomi, and us to bring all that information together and put it in a functional form for those individuals that are interacting, and a caregiver, care coordinator, call center, even from the patients.
Just to follow on, I won't repeat some of those details, but when we think about the depth of data and analysis that has to take place, yes, AI, machine learning, all that's made very real and apparent to future state thinking. Headless algorithms, agreeing on a data model. You know, these things seeded by HL7, hey, let's use this schema, let's use these vocabularies, formalize these, at least in libraries. That leaves ourselves open to really secure privacy and security tenets in that we could have a headless agent, a headless algorithm inspect and just return the answers without worrying about country borders or things like that. I think you're going to see more emphasis on that as algorithms become more prevalent in the marketplace, that things become a little bit more abstracted because we've standardized and come to an agreement that we're all in this together and that we have more similarities than we have differences. And so I'm pretty excited about that. I think that's right. I mean, I'm very thankful for some of these larger corporations and the efforts they've done to aggregate data and to make these very accessible in forms of toolkits and whatnot and open source. So I think that's going to be a very exciting thing going future. Thank you.
I'll add a different perspective. I don't know that I have the next big thing as my role as outcomes leader for patient experience. I challenge all of you. Something that I was having a light bulb moment this morning was when I worked in the healthcare industry, well, I still roundabout do, but when I was there day to day, we brought patients and families in as advisors. I challenge you as a technology company to do that if you're not already doing that. Whether it's a virtual group or a group that you can bring in to act as advisors for you. I know that it's important, they have great feedback, and they can help all of us in the technology world as we look to interact with each other, work together, collaborate to improve clinical outcomes. I think it'll go a long way for us.
And yes, I'd also like to echo the machine learning, AI, augmented intelligence. I think that's the next big thing because it's probably next. It's becoming practical to do those kinds of things now. And so from a patient care point of view, that certainly will improve patient outcome, and it's probably the next big thing in my mind as well to echo that. And then maybe a different approach would be just for patient experience in general would be just the improvement and increase in connectivity that we see where we're moving to faster and more ubiquitous wireless networks everywhere, and that helps not only the person in the bed but the person at the bedside when they're checking on their loved ones as well as trying to figure out what's going on with the patient itself.
I want to thank the panel for all of their comments and ask the audience now if you had some questions that came up during the discussion. Now's the time to ask them some questions. So if you do, please come to the microphone in the middle.